You know how sometimes you hear a story from history and you just think, no way, there is no way that actually happened? Well, it turns out some final chapters are so weird, so unlucky, that they really do sound like fiction. Today, we're going to dive into some of the most bizarre and unluckiest final moments ever recorded.
Look, we've all had those days at work, right? Where everything that can go wrong does go wrong. You spill coffee all over your laptop, or a huge project you've been working on just completely bombs. But really, what's the worst that could happen on a bad day?
Well, for the people we're about to talk about, a bad day wasn't just about a missed deadline or an angry boss. For them, the answer to what's the worst that could happen was, well, everything. Their bad days ended up being their last days in the most unforgettable ways. All right, so let's kick things off with a man whose obsession with perfection literally led to his own death. This is the story of Francois Vatel, a guy who took his job so seriously, it actually killed him. So first things first, a lot of people think Vatel was a chef, but he wasn't. He was a maître d', the master of the house. I want you to picture being the general of a massive army, but instead of soldiers, you're coordinating decorations, entertainment, and food for royalty. This was back in 1671, and he was serving King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself. The pressure was unbelievable. You don't get do-overs with the king. And this is where things start to go off the rails. Vatel had planned this epic 3-day feast for 3,000 of France's most important people. The only problem? 6,000 people showed up. Just like that, his guest list doubled, and the pressure went from immense to completely and utterly impossible. Somehow, the first day went okay. I mean, there were some issues, some fireworks got rained out, which for a perfectionist like Vatel was probably a huge deal. But on the morning of day 2, real disaster struck. The main course was fish, and only half of his order showed up. For you and me, that's an inconvenience. For Vatel, this was an absolute world-ending catastrophe. He was so distraught, so convinced that he had failed and brought shame upon himself that he went back to his room and took his own life. And here's the absolute tragic, mind-bending irony of it all. Just moments, literally moments, after he died, a servant came running to his door to tell him that the rest of the fish had just arrived. A permanent solution to what was just a temporary problem. Okay, so from a man destroyed by professional pressure, we're going to pivot to a man destroyed by social pressure. Yeah, our next story is about how being way too polite can be fatal. Let's talk about Tycho Brahe, one of the most brilliant scientific minds of the 16th century. Now, before we get to his really unfortunate end, you have to understand who this guy was. Tycho wasn't just some dude with a star chart. He was an absolute giant of astronomy. This is one of the last great astronomers to map the heavens with incredible detail without a telescope. He charted hundreds of stars, spotted supernovas, and he even mentored the legendary Johannes Kepler. The guy was a rock star. So picture this, it's 1601, and Tycho is at this fancy royal banquet, and he really has to go to the bathroom. But in his world, getting up from the table before the host was a massive social faux pas. It was just considered incredibly rude. So he just sat there and held it for hours. And that one decision, that one moment of being too polite was a fatal one. Holding it in for that long caused a severe bladder infection that his body just couldn't fight. 11 days after that dinner party, the great astronomer Tycho Brahe was dead, all because he didn't want to seem rude. It's a pretty powerful reminder that sometimes it's okay to just excuse yourself. All right, if you thought those stories were wild, you better buckle up, because things are about to get a whole lot weirder. These next 2 stories are honestly some of the most bizarre, shocking, and just plain unlucky tales you will ever hear. So, we've got 2 incredible stories here. On one side, we have Isadora Duncan, a trailblazing dancer whose entire life was marked by tragedy, only to be topped off by a freak accident. And on the other, Countess Cornelia Zangari Bondi, an Italian noblewoman whose strange, fiery death is still talked about today. So, Isadora Duncan's life was just this incredible mix of artistic genius and deep personal tragedy. She completely changed the world of dance with her modern, free-flowing movements. But her private life was filled with absolute heartbreak, the most devastating of which was when her 2 young children tragically drowned in a car accident.
Her own death was just as sudden and so deeply ironic. It was 1927, she was a passenger in an open-top car, and she was wearing one of her signature long, flowing scarves. That very symbol of her artistic freedom got caught in the axle of the car's rear wheel. Her neck was broken instantly. A life that was all about freedom of movement was ended in a split second by a piece of clothing.
And now for Countess Cornelia. Back in 1731, she was found in her bedroom, or what was left of her. She had been reduced to a pile of ash, except for her legs and part of her head, which were untouched. And get this, the furniture in the room was barely even scorched. The scene was so bizarre it sparked whispers of a terrifying and mysterious phenomenon: spontaneous human combustion.
But modern science has a much more likely explanation, and honestly, it's just as grim. It's called the Wick effect. So here's what probably happened. The Countess was known to drink heavily, and she had also just used a brandy-based ointment. It's thought she passed out near a lamp, which ignited her alcohol-soaked nightgown. Her clothing then acted like the wick of a candle, and her own body fat served as the fuel source. This creates a really slow, low-temperature fire that can consume a torso but leave limbs intact, which matches the scene perfectly. So, probably not so spontaneous after all.
All right, for our last story, we're heading over to the Mughal Empire to talk about a ruler who fought his way back from nothing, who overcame unbelievable odds, only to be taken down by something, well, something embarrassingly simple.
The life of Emperor Humayun is like something out of a movie. I mean, look at this. He inherits this massive new empire. Then he loses the whole thing thanks to betrayal from his own family. He spends 15 years in exile, basically with nothing. Then, against all odds, he raises an army and wins his entire empire back in 1555. It's one of the greatest comeback stories in history. And then, just 1 year later, he's leaving his library with his arms full of books. He hears the call to prayer, and as he tries to kneel, he gets his foot tangled in his robe and just tumbles down a stone staircase. He died 3 days later from his injuries. After all of that, a battle-hardened emperor taken out by a flight of stairs?
And that really brings us to a final question, doesn't it? When you look at all these stories, from the high-stakes perfectionism of Vatel to the simple, clumsy fall of an emperor, it makes you wonder, what's a truly unluckier way to go? Is it the big, dramatic, tragic downfall, or is it the small, the absurd, the totally avoidable mistake that gets you in the end? It's a fascinating question about luck, legacy, and the incredibly strange ways history remembers us.